Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Return to Silent Hill, starring Jeremy Irvine and Hannah Emilio Anderson, directed by Christoph Gans, the director of the original film, back in the chair. And welcome back to Silent Hill after I did that series back 4 years ago. And they're just as bad as I remembered. But will this be any bad as the last one? Let's get into it and find out. We open with a painter named James Sunderland, played by Jeremy Irvine, driving towards a town called Silent Hill, not for in Silent Hill purposes, but from a mountain until he almost crashes by not paying fucking attention and hits the luggage of Mary Crane, played by Hannah Emily Anderson, as she was going to the city. Which city exactly? This movie was filmed in Germany, while I believe it's supposed to take place in America, which bothers me. Well, I guess it doesn't bother me too badly, but this movie bothers me, as I can't make sense of this movie, as James offers Mary a ride for missing out on her bus to the city, but she declines until eventually James takes Mary back to her home in Silent Hill as they introduce themselves. And this opening scene was dreadful because the two actors have no chemistry whatsoever, and the acting is horrible. And I hate these characters throughout as we move on to James waking up as it was a dream. And I typically hate that, as his therapist calls him while he's drunk. He gets into bar fights, and we as well as getting thrown out. And I immediately knew I was in for a rocky ass time with this movie, as he grieves himself over the death of Mary a year before this movie takes place. As James gets back home and receives a mysterious letter from Mary back in Silent Hill, saying she's at the hospital, and begs him to come back there. And he drives there with no way to get in until he does. And at this point, I knew I was in a bad place, and this is so far a careless bad movie. And I'm only 10 minutes in. James gets into Silent Hill and sees himself in the mirror and tries to get back into their apartment. And I get the impression he must have broken up with Mary before her death, and encounters as we'll see later in the film, named Angela. And he encounters a woman named Angela who tells James Mary didn't make it alive. And if he can't find Mary, come find Angela. And we flash back to James and Mary as a couple in a picnic area until she starts bleeding, and she says there's a side of her he hasn't seen. And we come back to James getting into Silent Hill and looking for Mary while it's all snowy and ashes are flying everywhere, and everything is abandoned. And he finds a homeless man in an alleyway. And I'm having a headache on my second viewing, as this movie is a headache worthy, and I can't make sense of this motherfucking movie from start to finish. The therapist calls James while he's in Silent Hill, as he says he sees a light flickering with the homeless man encountering a creature of some kind, while we flash back to James meeting Mary's friends. And that was just bizarre. And the flashbacks are very bizarre, and James encounters a creature as it spits blood from the front, and the special effects look terrible. Absolutely fucking terrible. And this just bored me to death. As James hides and gets encountered by some face hugging creatures eating a rat, as that made me get a vibe of the face hugger from Alien, while James runs away from them and hides in a building from those creatures, and it ends up in a castle where their apartment is at. And where the fuck is this not making sense? The problem is the story doesn't make much sense. And as far as video games movies go, this puts Uwe Boll's stuff right in the place of shame. And this is just as bad as his films are, in my opinion. The therapist calls back up to get James out of Silent Hill, and there are images and flashbacks going on I can't make sense of. For example, the scene when Mary and her friends do a ritual while James enters the picture, and he asks, "What the fuck is going on here?" And I could ask the same question, and she says they barged in the place as she sees the head of Mary's father, which is the weirdest scene in the fucking movie. Meanwhile, James encounters a man named Eddie vomiting in the toilet and says something bullshit, some bullshit nonsense about how Silent Hill is cursed, and James hears a little girl named Laura crying as Eddie says to not trust her, as it's a bad idea to trust her, to get the fuck out of there, as we get a monster with a pyramid monster, that's what the fuck it's called, walking up and doesn't get James but gets Eddie and kills him. And do I give a shit? Hell to the motherfucking no, because he was an asshole. A spider looking creature with a woman's head going after James, and he manages to get away until it finds him, and the pyramid monster comes in, killing the spider looking creature, and it hears James breathing out loud and finds him until the noise and comes and defeats it. And I couldn't tell you what the fuck that was, as James manages to get out of it conveniently and sees Angela with a knife and tells him he shouldn't have come to Silent Hill, and tells James to leave, and he does until he encounters Laura, and he doesn't understand how she got out of there, and that pisses me off. And this movie pisses me off from the right out the fucking bat. While she runs away, and James gets into a maze and finds another version of Mary named Maria, and he's looking to the hospital, at the hospital, and wants to get there, or for the hospital, excuse me, and wants to get there. At this point, I'm checked out of this movie, and I'm ready to walk out of the theater on my first viewing, because this is truly as awful as Silent Hill Revelation. James takes off with Maria gets to the hospital and to look for the real Mary, as Maria hears Mary's operation on tape, and she explains everything about Mary and her ritual with her father Joshua. And I don't give a fuck at this point, because I'm checked out of the movie and I'm desperately wanting to leave the theater, but I'm not pulling off another screamers as they run and get into danger left to right and until they get in the elevator, blah blah blah. I just don't care at all anymore. Maria is bleeding, and she was cut while in the elevator, and James gets her out of there, and he wants to look for Mary, but she doesn't want him to leave her. While James encounters Laura, and she says she has a baby and left her behind, as James doesn't understand why, and Laura says it was never supposed to be easy, which is true in life, but at the same time, I wanted this movie to please end, and it makes all sorts of bullshit nonsense that I can't make sense of anymore. And James sees Mary as a mummy until he wakes up in the hospital in Silent Hill, as the therapist happens to be there and explains Mary has been dead for months now. And oh my god, I'm super angry with this movie at this point for its nonsense. Like, can they ever tell us in the beginning of the movie instead of late, like this did? James comes back to Mary, flashbacks to Mary getting home, as he demands them to leave Silent Hill, but she refuses. So he leaves anyways after an intense argument that I could care less about. Back at the hospital, James is calmer, as he doesn't want his therapist to talk to him, but she does, and he blames himself for the death of Mary, and he's back in the deserted Silent Hill without finding Mary, and he comes back to Maria, and I just don't care. Neither does he, as he walks to the elevator, and she joins him in the elevator to a place he can't go in, but he does anyways, and it's a fucking maze. And he's still led to believe Mary is still alive, and Maria doesn't exist, excuse me, and she gets killed by the pyramid monster with a machete. And James paints red nonstop until he does, and my eyes were just hurting at this point because of the goddamn flashing lights. And he gets up in a puddle of the hospital down, and can't this movie just fucking end already? James sees Laura and says he's not playing anymore, and she asks if he's ready to face her, and she asks Mary's full name, which is Mary Laura Maria Crane, and why 4 names, which didn't make much sense to me. And James wants to help Mary and almost puts him in the sinking bed, and I don't know what the fuck I'm watching anymore, as this is so fucking bad. Meanwhile, James sees the real Mary in the fire, while the therapist says he needs to let her go, as he sees Mary in her room, and takes care of her in his imagination, as she wants to be free by dying as he kills her off. And why the fuck is this movie still going is just pissing me off from the get-go. It's beyond me, as this is preposterous. The moths of Silent Hill take Mary away from James, and he says goodbye to her while looking like Freddy Krueger, and he's forgiven by her, but he can't forgive himself as he drives her along with him in the water, and he'll never let her go of her. And we go back to the beginning of the movie, but with the minor difference, which is he drives her to the city, and the climax made me run out of the theater bleeding my eyes out when the credits finally rolled, as this is so bad. But how bad? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 1.0 out of 10. I almost walked out of the theater on my first viewing because this is one of the worst movies I've seen this year so far. And I expect the upcoming Strangers Chapter 3 to be just as bad as this thing, as it makes no fucking sense. And the two actors have no chemistry whatsoever, as I hated their characters throughout, as the acting is horrible. And 10 minutes into the movie, I immediately knew I was in a rocky place, as this was a careless bad movie. It is predictable in a way I can't make sense of this movie from start to finish, as this is headache worthy, while the flashbacks are just bizarre, while the special effects looking absolutely fucking terrible. And I was getting bored, and was like I said, I having a headache from start to finish. And as far as video game movies goes, this puts Uwe Boll's stuff to shame, as it's that bad for damn sure. This movie pissed me off right off the fucking bat, as I checked out an hour into the movie, and this is the strongest non-recommendation for this, as this is truly as awful as Silent Hill Revelation. While this movie was blah blah fucking blah, as I just don't care for the series from the start to today, and I never want to see another Silent Hill movie ever again. So please, whatever you do, don't see this fucking movie, as it's that bad. In fact, it's worse. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this review and coming back to the Silent Hill retrospective. And until then, don't go back to Silent Hill, folks.